Go. Hi, and welcome to Discovering the Work You Were Born to Do Now. How to find and follow your calling. My name is Diane Haworth. I'm a heart-centered success coach, a speaker, an author. I have a show on the Awake TV network, and I'm also the founder of the Be Love Principles. And I have to tell you that I am really excited to see everybody here today. And I'm especially excited to talk to my friend, Nick. Hi, Nick.
Hi, how you doing? So where are you? You're in Virginia, aren't you?
I'm in Virginia. I'm in the shadow of the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. So we are about 50 miles southwest of DC, and you're in beautiful London.
Yeah, I'm in North London in Finchley, and we're having a heat wave at the moment. So if you look closely, you can probably see beads of sweat, and they're not nerves.
Well, if I hadn't adjusted my lights, you would have seen the same thing here. So I want to welcome everybody. We have quite an international audience, and I think, Nick, this really does speak to how excited everybody is about this topic and how pertinent it is. I am just going to admit, there we go, these extra folks. So let's talk a little bit about what we thought about. You and I obviously had a conversation outside of this, and everybody, of course, worldwide is dealing with the pandemic, the aftermath of the pandemic. But you wrote your book, The Work You Were Born to Do, what, 20 years ago?
Yeah, it came out in 99, so it's been out for 21 years now.
So this is not something that is specific to a pandemic.
No.
Nick, in your career, you're an international best-selling author. I pulled actually one of my favorite books of yours. This one is rather recent. Be Inspired, Be Inspiring, Be Yourself. Any Nick Williams book is great, by the way. And we're up to what, 18 now?
Yep, writing 19 and 20, I think. Yep.
Okay, yeah. That's the kind of guy my buddy Nick is. That's incredible. He's also had an extensive career in broadcasting, in speaking. He's a leadership and executive coach. And we actually met years ago at an Enneagram class in London. And the class was being taught by our friend, Robert Holden. And I was very impressed then just by everything about Nick, quite frankly. And not only did we start talking, but Nick became my coach. And I have to say, some of the techniques and tools you taught me, I use to this day.
Right.
Absolutely wonderful. And I am just going to keep checking to make sure we don't have anybody waiting to get in, but I think we're good. So when we're talking about how to find and follow your calling, particularly now, it was really interesting. I was at a local establishment in town here this morning, and I was speaking to a lady, and she's going to be displaced as a result of the business being consolidated, and that had to do with some of the pandemic stuff. But she said something really interesting to me, Nick. She said, you know, I've wanted to leave here for years, and I don't think I ever would have done it if this hadn't happened. So as we get going, can you speak a little bit just to that the now is always, it's always now?
Yeah, well, I remember doing an interview on Irish television, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago when they were going through a recession. And I joked with the presenter and said, you know, everyone's complaining about losing the jobs they never wanted to have in the first place. So, you know, I say that lightly, but also I'm very aware that a lot of people are suffering. You know, a lot of people are in a lot of fear. You know, you know, we all know that the basic idea of work for most of us, how we've been brought up to think of it, is it's what we do to earn a living. It's what we do to survive. You know, and it's and the loss of a job can bring up survival issues. And for me, the work we're born to do idea and having a calling is about survival, but it's way beyond survival. It's about having a purpose that's both emotional and spiritual. And I think for many people, this is an opportunity to go, well, what is it that I know I've always really wanted to do? And in my heart, I know I'm probably here to do, but I haven't had necessarily the courage or the wherewithal or, in a way, perhaps the opportunity to do so far. And maybe the pandemic actually forces the opportunity to do it because other options may have been cut off in the process.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I do want to speak about our calling and our spirituality and why I think we're here and who we are. So that's one part of the equation, but I don't want to minimize the amount of suffering. I've suffered quite a bit over the last few months. I was ill, and my partner Helen was ill, and then sadly my mum died. As well as all the pandemic stuff been going on. So I'm very aware of how many people are suffering. And the question for me is like, how do we turn that suffering into some kind of gift? How do we transmute it? How do we transform it? How do we make it into some kind of gold? That also fascinates me.
I love what you're saying. And I also just want to reiterate these kinds of sufferings, right? They do occur all the time outside of pandemics. The loss of a parent is one you and I talked about when we were coaching together, because my dad had recently passed. That opens up, for example, that life change opens up a different possibility of what your purpose is now. So I read something right before we went on, actually. It was an article where they were interviewing a physician in Japan, 105 years old. And they were asking him what was the key to longevity. The number one thing he cited was living a purposeful life. That's how important it is. That's how important it is. Rather it's you are being forced to change, rather you're choosing to change, rather it's retirement. Rather it is something that is shifted because of suffering or some other type of event. Lots of people shift their purpose when they have new children in the house. But we're always changing our now. So I do love the idea that we acknowledge that this is not an easy process necessarily.
No.
But boy, is it worthwhile.
Sure. And although many of us probably feel like we're being forced to change, I also like the idea that within even the forcing us to change is an invitation to change. There's a part of us, I always love that idea that I think it's in the Kabbalah tradition about, over every blade of grass is an angel saying, grow, grow, grow. So if a blade of grass has an angel over it, getting it to grow, what might we have inviting us to grow and to blossom? And maybe for many of us, this is it's a gift wrapped in a way that we don't necessarily recognize. So part of what I want to talk about is like, how do we recognize the gift in it as well? What could be the gift in the difficulty?
So let's talk about that. What is the basic thing you'd like people to know actually about this whole discovering process, recognizing their calling? And what would you like people to know about that?
It almost seems too big. It's such a big thing. I almost forget it myself sometimes. For me, the biggest question is like, well, before we think about what we're here to do, who are we? So I think it comes back to a sense of identity. Who do we think we are? And the reality for most of us is that we've been brought up to think that we are our personality. And of course we are our personality, but it's not the only thing we are. And our personality is our age and our sex and our qualifications and where we live and all the programming and conditioning that we have. And I'd forgotten about this until recently when I'm writing something new and it suddenly came back to me. And I put this in the work we were born to do, and I thought I'd share it with you. It's part of a poem from Wordsworth called Ode to Imitations of Immortality. And I remember when I first read this, it's probably 3 decades ago that I first read this, and part of me went, whoa, it's one of those, I'd call them an awakening moment, if you like. And this is just a tiny little verse out of a big poem of his, but it says, our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, has had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. And I remember when I first read that, I went, whoa, why didn't somebody tell me that when I was growing up? Why wasn't somebody whispering that over my crib when I was a baby? So for me, the bigger question to start with is, well, who are we? Before we can really answer the question, what are we doing here? Because on a personality level, like we said, we're here to survive. On a soul level, I don't think we're here simply to survive. We're here I suppose to some extent for our own soul's joy. You know, we're here. We chose to be here. And I think perhaps the first thing is we chose to be here. I do believe that, you know, that we weren't just sent here, we didn't turn up randomly, that some part of us has chosen to be here and chosen to be here at this time and chosen to be here at this time to make some kind of contribution to what's going on in the world right now. So it's that memory that at the deepest part of us is whatever you want to call it. And I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. So there's some part of us that's beyond our personality, whether we call that our soul or our spirit. To me, it doesn't matter. I'm not trying to convert anybody to any particular religion or spiritual belief. But both you and I, Diana, are students of A Course in Miracles. We both love A Course in Miracles. And one of the things I love about The Course in Miracles is it says repeatedly in different lessons, you are as God created you. You are spirit, you are free. It's almost like we've fallen asleep to who we really are. And we're here to awaken to who we really are. And that's not to deny all our humanity and our foibles and our fears and our vulnerabilities and our insecurities, but it's to say that's not the sum total of who we are. We are here as a bigger, powerful, resourceful, creative being with a contribution to make to this world at this time. So it's a long answer to your very short question about where do I start? And for me, that's the starting point.
Well, I agree. And I love the idea that we are so much more than this, especially now. Many people feel vulnerable, and certainly we are, but we are also powerful beings. And anybody that follows my work knows that I believe we are all here to live love. Now, I think it's sort of like an ice cream shop. And I don't know if in Europe you have these things. We used to have something here called like a Baskin Robbins. They would have 31 flavors of ice cream.
Oh.
I basically think we're all ice cream. We're all here to live love, but we have different flavors, right? And I also think that what we're here to do shifts as we age, mature, or in different stages of our life. That's why I love that you're talking about now. What are we here to do now?
Yeah, great. Because what I was here to do 25 years ago is not what I'm here to do today. And I expect the same for you and everybody else on this call. It's like, you know, what lit us up and inspired us and brought us alive, you know, previously may not do that anymore. So again, I think the kind of opportunity in the suffering that we may be going through is it may be time to shed a skin. We've outgrown something.
Yeah.
You know, some sense of our identity, some way of thinking about ourselves no longer serves us, and it no longer serves the world. I think we said in the blurb that, you know, I'd share my highest thought about, you know, well, what is our purpose and what's the purpose of work? And you've kind of just alluded to it, really. So I'm just saying what you said in a different way. But the first time I heard the words from Khalil Gibran, from the Prophet, that said, our work is our love made visible. Our work is our love made visible. And in a way, that's what awoke me to the idea of the work we were born to do, because I think until then I'd had some kind of idea about, you know, our work is something we do to earn a living, and our spirituality is something we do on a Sunday morning if we go to church, and that the two don't meet.
Yeah.
And it still seems for most people, you know, I've had many conversations, as I'm sure you have, with many people over the years when I've talked about our work being our love made visible, and they've kind of gone, what a load of crap. You know, we work to earn a living, we work to build up our status in the world, and our spirituality has nothing to do with our work whatsoever. And, you know, for some people that's true. And I think for many of us, we want to bridge that gap. We want our love, our work, our leadership, our creativity, whatever it is we're up to in the world, we want it to be the expression of our love. So I think for me, there's two bits there. Number one is just to keep reminding ourselves that our work is the vehicle for our love, is the vehicle for our spirituality. And some people on the call, I don't know, have you ever been to the Findhorn Foundation?
I haven't, but actually that was a reference that I was going to bring up. I read Eileen Caddy every morning, her words of wisdom every morning. And one of the things that she always talks about, and if you're not familiar with Eileen Caddy, she was one of the original founders at Findhorn in Scotland. She talks about bringing love to all the work you do. And Nick, I have to tell you, I had to mentally remind myself that the other day when I was cleaning out a closet because I was not feeling very loving. And I had to remember this is a task. I bring love. I attempt to bring love to everything that I do.
Mm,
So I turned music on, listened to different things, and I made that a more joyful
mm,
piece of work. So I
mm,
think I love the idea that we're talking about work not only as what we do for a living, but just our everyday making dinner, taking out the trash, doing the closet,
sure.
whatever we're doing, that
Yeah.
is what we can bring love to right now.
Yeah, because the reason I mentioned Findhorn is I think that's when I had one of my first kind of tangible experiences of that being true. I just went up there for a few days, probably about 3 decades ago, maybe even longer, 35 years ago. And I just worked for a few days in the kitchen up at Findhorn. And, even before they started making the food, they would, join hands and form a circle and say, we dedicate, that we chop the carrots with love, that we serve the food with love, that we cook it with love, because the people we're cooking lunch for are going to be cooking our dinner. So, why not do it as an act of love? And it just really struck me that it wasn't just a nice idea, but it's a very tangible thing. Love is not just an idea, it's so tangible. I had that, just before my mum died a few months ago. I went to the care home. She took a turn for the worst, and I was able to kind of break lockdown and go and visit her a couple of times before she passed away. And I remember the carer saying to me, it breaks our heart to see the residents here deteriorating because they're not getting the love of their families. And it just, something really hit me, that love is not just a great idea, it is tangible. Residents were deteriorating because they weren't experiencing the love of their relatives. They could have the love of the carers, but that wasn't the same as the love of their relatives. So really, I think one of the things we're being asked to do today is realize that love isn't just a nice idea, it's a tangible thing. People feel it. So firstly, I think, the thing that I had until that point where I went to visit Findhorn was that there are some works that are inherently more spiritual, if you like, than others. If you're a healer or whatever, that could be loving work. But if you're a hairdresser, a gardener, or a plumber, or a leader, they were kind of different domains. But I think what I realized is that we all have a spiritual job description, if you like, and that's to use whatever our earthly job description is, use that as a vehicle for spreading love in the world. So whether we're a hairdresser, whether we're a gardener, a plumber, a leader, a parent, an artist, a healer, a creator, whatever we are, our job is to spread love through the doing of it. And as you said, and I'm acutely aware, sometimes I am not open to that. Sometimes in a bad mood. Sometimes I'm in an angry mood. Sometimes I'm really pissed off or depressed or whatever. So for me, the kind of spiritual path, if you like, is to forever be expanding the terrain on which I can be more of that vehicle for love. And I can have good days where everything feels great and bad days where I think I'm just a pain in the arse and I should stay out of everybody's way because I'm bad news. But for me, the spiritual path is to be able to more and more be that channel for love without denying those other parts of me. Because for me, it's about embracing all the shadow parts of us and not just being bright and cheerful and everything's all right when it's not. It is about engaging, as we've said a couple of times already, about engaging with our suffering and having compassion for our own and other people's suffering. So I think what I realized is, today is that anything can be what we were born to do, that we can use anything we do. I feel like I've met enlightened people that work at the post office, filling me stamps. I've met enlightened people that work on the supermarket checkout. I've met very unenlightened people that are healers. I've met very unenlightened people that run new age shops. It's not about the job. It's about the consciousness you bring to it.
And I love when I meet someone, as you said, regardless of what their job is, whether it's caring for an ill parent, a small child, a garden, they're a dog walker. As a matter of fact, there's a lady here in town who's a dog walker who is the most joyful being I think I've ever seen. She just radiates love and joy. That's what she does. She brings it to everybody. She's smiling and she's speaking to everyone. It's just absolutely magical the way that she brings that to her work. I've also found when there are people who may not be employed in a situation that they are thrilled about, if they can shift to that place of service and love, and still look for another job. But while they're there, bring as much love, compassion, kindness, certainly professionalism to it. Their experience changes, and so does everybody else.
Mm. And I love that. And, you know, I think what a lot of people get caught up in, and I've been there myself, is, you know, we're kind of waiting to find what we were born to do. And when we do find it, then we'll commit to it and we'll be wholehearted about it.
Yeah.
And I'm all about bringing our kind of wholeheartedness to whatever we're doing. You know, before I do what I do today, which is to write and speak and coach and mentor and broadcast. You know, I used to sell computers, and part of me thought, well, this isn't what I was put on earth to do. But if I'm honest now, looking back on it, what I loved about it was serving people, even if I was selling computers to them. My joy would be from kind of solving a problem and them saying to me, you know, what you sold us has really helped us. Our business runs better. We're so happy. That was the clue. I loved people. I loved serving people. I loved making people's lives better. I now do that in the way that feels most what I was designed for and what I was created for. But the clues were there in everything. So I'm a great believer that if you can give yourself wholeheartedly to whatever's in front of you, it will expand your vistas of what your best canvases are, if you like. You know, that whatever it is that you like, whatever your best, however you're best at expressing your love in the world, it will begin to come clear to you where you start expressing it wherever you are.
However you best express love in the world. What a beautiful phrase. Now, when we put in our promotional material that you were going to discuss the 3 major ways that help people discover what their calling is, what were you referring to in that?
Great. Yeah, well, you know, because I think my first book, if I look back on it, and maybe I'm being a bit tough on myself, but I thought, you know, it put out a really great idea, which is there is a work that each of us were born to do. Work can be an expression of our love, our spirituality, our creative gifts. But I'm not sure that I went as deep because I wasn't as aware of it at the time. And like, well, how do you actually find that? You know, so in a way that's work I've done since I wrote the book, if you like. You know, I've written a load of other books, but, you know, I've thought about that a lot because people have asked me questions and I've just reflected on it. And obviously now, since the book came out 21 years ago, I've probably had several thousand more conversations with people answering those kind of questions. So there's 3 major signposts that I've come up with, if you like, or not come up with, but I've become aware of, that point people to what they were born to do. So shall I start to share those 3 with you?
Yeah, let's do that.
You know, I suppose the cleanest, you know, and I say cleanest because I think it's the most direct, you know. So let me share 1 or 2 kind of, if you like, what I would call a presupposition or an assumption. Part of us, I think, already knows what we were born to do. I would call that our soul. Our soul, our hearts already knows. But somehow it's got layered and we've forgotten. But it's not like we've got to go through a careers test or a psychometric test and that will tell us what we're born to do. You know, and in my experience, most people, if they're really honest, they know that small, still voice in them that just keeps telling them what they're here for. But they don't think it's maybe something they could make a living out of, or, you know, that they could actually do, or they feel inadequate to do it. So the first and cleanest way to get to that kind of pre-existing clarity, if you like, is through a sense of inspiration. So whenever anyone says to me, you know, I'm not doing, you know, I don't feel like I'm doing what I was born to do. How would I go about finding what I was born to do? My first question is always, so what would inspire you? And for most people, there's a stunned silence afterwards because probably nobody's ever asked them that question before. So it's some version of, you know, what would inspire you, what has inspired you that's run out, or, you know, what do you dream might inspire you, what would light your heart up. But it's the most direct route to our soul. I think our soul thrives on inspiration. When we're in the presence of inspiration, you know, we come alive. It's like an osmotic effect. When I'm in the presence of other people's inspiration, things become alive in me. So I just ask people that basic question. So what would inspire you? What would thrill you? What would light your heart up? And often that alone gets them off on a whole new path. You know, I remember, I think it was about 2 years ago now, 2 years ago, I was talking to a woman who'd hired me to coach her, and she'd already been running a business for about 12 years, but she said, if I'm honest, I'm a bit bored. You know, I've kind of doing it for 12 years. What inspired me 12 years ago doesn't inspire me anymore. So I said to her, so what would inspire you next? And by the time I spoke to her again, she'd come up with a new business idea, started a new business idea, turned her boyfriend into a fiance, planned the wedding day, and several other things. And I thought, all that from simply asking one question: what would inspire you next? Because I think a part of us already knows the answer to that, but I think we're often afraid to hear it, or we've just not given ourselves the gift of asking ourselves the question and giving us that free space. So, you know, to me, there's a big difference between inspiration and motivation. I think we often think of, especially around work, that we have to motivate ourselves to find something. But to me, inspiration has a different quality. You know, I like that idea that, you know, motivation is when you get hold of an idea, but inspiration is when an idea gets hold of you. And I think inspiration is always trying to find every single one of us. And I'm slightly joking, but there's a part of me that's serious about it. You know, if I had £1 for every person that said to me, I'm waiting for inspiration to strike me, I often feel like I want to give them a slap and go, inspiration's already shouting at you. Are you listening to it? Because I think most of us, if we're really honest, we know what inspires us. But we kind of go, oh, but it's too big, it's too scary. It's, you know, inspiration's got a great idea for me, but I've obviously got somebody else's mail. It's a great idea, but it's obviously not my idea. You know, somebody else should have this idea.
And I bet that's exactly what some of our audience is thinking about. Yeah, I know what I want to do, but I can even hear them, but.
Yeah.
So how do you answer the but?
Well, that's the second signpost. So let me just share my favorite kind of quote about inspiration, and it comes from Patanjali. You've probably heard me share it before. But again, I came across this quote about 3 decades ago, and it said, when you're inspired by some great purpose or extraordinary project, all your thoughts break your bonds, your mind transcends limitations, and your consciousness expands in every direction. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive in you, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. Now, that was written 23 centuries ago. And yet I've shared that in 17 countries around the world when I've been speaking, and everyone goes, wow, that's amazing. So, you know, I think when we're inspired, there's something both universal and eternal about it. You know, somebody who was inspired 23 centuries ago was incredibly powerful. Somebody who's truly inspired today is incredibly powerful. You know, I think of often of, you know, when I talk about this, I think about Oprah Winfrey. I heard her say, you know, I think she's still the you know, most successful, richest woman on the planet. And she said, I'm in the inspiration business. I provide inspiration for people. Hasn't done her too bad. I think inspiration is not a luxury, it's a human need. And when we do access inspiration, we're accessing our deepest self. We're accessing our soul. And our soul just wants to blossom and express itself. And as we'll come on to talk about in a minute, that ego part of us, that personality goes, oh, no, you don't. You stay in your box. You stay small and afraid. But we'll come on to that in a minute. But did you want to make a comment about inspiration, or say something else about that?
One of the things that I tell my clients all the time is love is intelligent, creative, and expansive. And that's what inspiration is.
Yeah.
When you are feeling constricted, that's not love. That's not love trying to blossom in your life. And I think that we forget, and I'm glad you're going to address it. Of course, I knew you would, that our ego is limited, but love is intelligent. It knows you have to pay the mortgage. It knows that you need food in the refrigerator. I just think that's it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. So I'm excited to hear how you go to the second signpost.
Sure. Well, I'll come on. Let me just say one more thing about inspiration, then I'll move on to, you know, what happens when most of us get inspired. So, you know, what is our relationship with inspiration? I can't say I have the definitive answer, even though I've written several books about the subject. It is a mystery, ultimately, what inspiration is. I think you're right. You know, I agree with you. Inspiration is a facet of love. I choose the word inspiration. I choose to use it a lot because, you know, I've worked a lot in the spiritual world, and I've worked a lot in the world of work and business and corporate and leadership. What I recognized was that most people can relate to the word inspiration. But when I talk about inspiration, I'm also talking about love. I'm also talking about creativity. I'm also talking about great leadership. But you know, leaders want to talk about feeling inspired. Spiritual people want to talk about feeling inspired. So I specifically use that word not to manipulate, but because I feel very comfortable with it. But it allows me to talk about all the things I want to talk about, whilst on the whole, stimulating the least amount of resistance in the people I'm talking to. So it feels like I've become an ambassador for the word, because it's an idea that gets me through doors that if I was talking about, you know, love made visible or something like that, I wouldn't get through those doors.
Well, I think Inspiration Ambassador is a lovely thing to add to your bio, by the way, friend.
That's nice. Yeah, I'll write that down. Thank you.
Put that down.
But what is our relationship with inspiration? I'm not saying, I'm about to say something, but I'm not saying that I believe it is true. What I'm saying is I believe this to be my experience. Well, no, I know this to be my experience, but I also know, you know, listening to and reading other artists, creative, inspired leaders, this is how it is kind of for them too. So I believe there is something like radio inspiration that's always being broadcast to everybody all the time. You know, a lot of people think that inspiration only begins when they get it. I think it's always being broadcast to all of us all the time. So the question is not, is inspiration a scarce resource that doesn't come my way? My answer would be, I don't think so. My answer would be, I think inspiration's in its own gentle way, shouting in your ear every moment of every day, trying to get your attention. So another way of looking at it is I think there's a realm of consciousness, if you like, where everything already exists out of form. And the inspiration is looking for what I would call willing human collaborators, people that are not so caught up in their own dramas, their own resistance, their own fears, which we'll talk about in a minute, who actually hear the inspiration speaking to them and have at least enough or almost enough self-confidence, self-belief to follow through on what they're feeling inspired to do. It's like inspiration is not in short supply. Inspiration is trying to get all of our attention all the time. So, you know, although the work we want to do became a bestseller, in a way, I'm not taking credit for the idea. The idea came to me one evening while I was giving a talk, and then I gave a talk on the subject, and then I gave a workshop on the subject. I did an audio on the subject. I did a workshop, and eventually the book. But I feel like I am still today, even in the call we're having right now, I'm a steward for this idea. This idea has come from another realm. I was inspired, I heard the inspiration, and I kind of said, I'll make this exist in the world. But I think inspiration is trying to do that to all of us all the time.
I agree.
I believe that. Can I prove it's true? No. May I be deluding myself? Yes, I may. But I'd rather have my form of delusion than thinking that I'm just here alone and separate.
No, I agree, actually. And I do think that once, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, once we open ourselves up and we're asking, that's how it works for me. When I ask what wants to come through me, it comes. And it's certainly usually not anything that I expect, by the way. I never thought when I was a little girl in school and they said, what do you want to do? I never thought I was going to be the love ambassador and talking about, I had no idea. That's not what I thought I was going to be. No,
we all know the idea, you know, we make plans and God laughs, you know, that kind of idea, you know, that our ego's plans are often very different from our soul's plans, our calling.
And so narrow.
Yeah.
And so narrow. You and I are about the same age. And literally when I was in grade school, as young girls, we had 3 choices: ballerina, teacher, or nurse. That was it. That's all I thought I had. That's all I had.
I didn't have those options. Yeah. You know, and yes, you know, that's why I love that quote from Patanjali about, you know, you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. You know, 30 years ago, it was a dream to write a book. If somebody had told me, you know, in 30 years' time, you'll have written 18 books, I'd have gone, you must be crazy. I can't even write one frigging book, let alone 18. So, yeah, I think inspiration does want to take us beyond our perceived limits of who we are and what we're capable of being and doing. You know, we are so much more resourceful, so much more capable than we think we are. We're so much more powerful than we think we are.
What would be the next step on your journey there?
Great. So that's number one signpost, inspiration. But of course, you know, what happens for most of us when we get inspired, within seconds, minutes, hours, or days, there's another voice that kicks in, usually saying something like, who the heck do you think you are? You know, that's a brilliant idea, but you could never do that. You know, who do you think you are? Get back in your box. So, you know, the collective word I've come up with, or I've adopted for all those voices of negativity and fear and doubt and self-sabotage, is resistance. So why is inspiration why is resistance a signpost to what we were born to do, is because I think most of us are going to have resistance to it. So my first question to many people is, you know, what is it that you feel most inspired to do? And then the second question is often, what do you most tell yourself you can't do? Mm. What do you keep talking yourself out of? What do you keep getting inspired about and then not doing? What do you distract yourself from? What do you procrastinate about doing? And then that often emerges as the same answer, but through a different set of questions. Because here's what I've come to see, and I'm not saying this is true for everybody, but it's certainly been true for me, and it's certainly been true for most of the people that I've had honest conversations with, that inspiration and resistance are like lightning and thunder. Mm. You know, the inspiration is the lightning, and you can almost guarantee that there's going to be some thunder that comes afterwards. That's the resistance. They come as buy one, get one free. You know, you buy inspiration, resistance comes free whether you want it or not.
The thunder's loud.
Yeah.
Thunder's loud too.
Yeah, and it's often a lot louder than the inspiration. And especially when I was more in the kind of spiritual world, you know, people would say, oh yeah, I thought I knew what I was born to do, but it was really difficult and I had some fears around it, so it obviously wasn't the right thing. And I think what I've realized over the years is, you know, often there's a lot of resistance to doing what we were born to do. I have had resistance to everything that I have done that has felt really true for me to do. From mild resistance to medium resistance to what I would call chronic resistance, to just give up and die type resistance. You know, what's the point? You know, this is too big. I can't do this. This is whatever. So I don't say that to depress. I say it, again, just to validate and inspire that all of us, if we're honest, know what resistance is. We know what it feels like. You know, if inspiration is heaven, resistance is often hell. You know, it's all those parts of us that kind of go, you're stupid, you know, you're arrogant, you're just being grandiose. All those kind of, you know, things that most of us know so well. So I've been around the block enough times now, as I'm sure you have, almost to kind of go, okay, I know when inspiration next strikes me, I am going to experience some resistance. So it's almost like I sit there and go, I know what the next step is. I wonder what my resistance this time is going to look like. You know, I knew back in about 2010 that my next step about, you know, leadership, my next step of kind of what I was born to do was about working with more inspired leadership. I resisted it, you know, for about 5 years. You know, I was doing it, but I was not committing to it. Part of me felt like it was a place I visited, but it wasn't a place that I lived in. I was allowed to go visit this place, but I couldn't inhabit it. It was like, you know, you've got to go home at the end of the day. This isn't where you belong. And it took me years for me to get to a place where I felt like, no, I belong in inspired leadership. I belong in the place where I'm working with people who are offering leadership to the world to help them be even more effective in their leadership and for me to be even more effective in my leadership. But gosh, did I have a lot of resistance to that.
And do you find that helping for yourself and your clients? I know when we worked together, actually, it was helpful for me to just anticipate that I would say booming voice of resistance. Yeah, just know that more than likely the voice is coming. And I love the idea that it's thunder, because mine does get loud.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, you know, I know often as coaches, you know, we're told not to give advice or not to teach and stuff. You know, I have the privilege of never having had a coaching training. So I've just kind of made it all up. So I'll often have conversations with people and say, look, can I just take a minute to do a bit of teaching with you and explain something that I've come to understand? I've called it resistance. This is what it looks like. This is what it is. And this is how we experience it. Does this resonate with you at all? Do you think that what we're talking about could be your resistance? So I don't tell them they're in resistance. I just teach a little bit and go, do you think this could be resistance? And they go, yeah, it sounds like it could actually. I've never thought of it that way. Because, you know, one of the ways that I've come to think of myself over the years, and I kind of like this job description, is like, I like to illuminate areas of our mind and areas of our psyche. And because I have had so much of my own resistance over the years, to the extent of nearly giving up many times, I feel I can shed a powerful light on the workings of resistance. So I feel I'm an illuminator of people's resistance, and I help them see it clearly, see what it is, see what purpose it's trying to serve, so they can get through it. And probably the bottom line thing that I would say about resistance, I've come to realize that both for me and, you know, most of the people I work with, the more important a project, a decision, or an action is to what we were born to do and our personal and spiritual evolution, the more likely we are to have resistance to it, and the bigger the resistance we're likely to have to it. So that's the bad news. But the good news is we only have resistance because there's something to resist. The very presence of resistance means there is something powerful that ego part of us is trying to blind us to.
And there is a difference, I find, between when I'm feeling resistance and when something's come up and it's just not something I'm choosing to do. It doesn't have the same charge. To me, if it's just not a preference, it's not a preference. When I'm really sweating it, I know, uh-oh, here's my ego coming in.
Yeah. So the way I tend to think of it is like, you know, I ask people, you know, were you truly inspired about this even for a few minutes? And then did the doubts and fears begin to creep in? And the answer is, if the answer is yes, then I think, well, it's probably true. But what you are kind of talking about, which I think is so prevalent, is often we have an idea that we then try and talk ourselves into because we think we should do it, or it's a great idea, or whatever our motivations might be. But it was never inspiring to us. So then it becomes like we're trying to force ourselves into doing something that isn't true for us. And not everything's going to be inspiring. You know, even today, I don't get inspired about going exercising. I don't get inspired about doing my tax returns. You know, they're just things that need doing. But I think what we're born to do has that flavor of inspiration to it.
And it has an energy to it. It has a charge.
And our consciousness expands. You know, that Patanjali quote. For me, whenever I'm hitting on an inspired idea, it's like, whoa, you know, my vista's open, my worldview opens, my sense of possibility opens. It may close down again afterwards with resistance, but I know that experience was there to start with. So the obvious question, well, what is resistance? And I think at the end of the day, all resistance is fear. You know, I don't think, you know, there is some wisdom in fear. You know, there's wisdom in not running out in front of a busy road or putting your hand in a fire. So there is some wisdom in fear. You know, there are some things that fear is genuinely trying to protect us from. But generally, I think most of our resistance is not a form of protection. It's a form of self-diminishment, if you like. It's our ego saying, oh, don't do this, you might look stupid, you might fail, you know, what would others think of you? The tribe may not agree with it, you may hit disapproval, you may not be loved anymore if you do this, you know, all that kind of stuff, which on the surface level can go, oh, that's a good point, I hadn't thought about that, or maybe I shouldn't do this, or maybe I should put it off for a couple of years and procrastinate until I'm kind of ready. But I think, you know, that's where it comes down to self-awareness and self-understanding, that it comes down to fear. But fear doesn't normally come out and show itself clearly as fear. It usually comes up as clever thinking or being protective of you in some way. So I think of it as resistance being fear with a great PR company working for it. You know, it comes up with really good reasons why not to do things. And you go, I've got some really good reasons why I shouldn't do that. And now I don't need to feel ashamed of not doing it because I've really got some good reasons for not doing it. It really makes sense to me.
That's it right there.
Sorry?
That's it right there. I don't have to feel ashamed for not feeling not going through with my inspiration because I have good reason.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Hope you all caught that. And I hope you're taking notes.
Yeah. And I would
brilliant.
call that, you know, another form of resistance in a way. And it's what we're talking about here is kind of rationalization.
Yeah.
You know, the bottom line is we get scared and then we make up reasons why it was never a good idea. And then we can satisfy ourselves with that. And probably we can satisfy other people. But at the end of the day, we're probably going to be giving ourselves a bit of a hard time because we know we're even lying to ourselves. You know, and I don't mean that to beat ourselves up, but it's just like, it requires great self-honesty to go, you know what, I'm just scared.
Yeah.
So the other side of it is, how do I find the courage? How do I find the bravery? How do I find the community, the support? How do I find people in my life that are cheering me on rather than telling me not to be stupid? You know, that kind of thing.
And
so,
where do we find that?
Yeah, well, you know, if anyone hires me as their coach, as I'm sure if they hire you as their coach, their resistance is not going to get an easy ride. You know, it's not that I stamp on people's resistance, but I will, you know, I have it as part of my contract. Do you want me to point out to you when I think you might be in resistance and you might be acting out of fear? I make that part of the contract. And if they don't want to know that, I'm probably not their coach.
I think that's a good point. And while you take a sip there, one of the things that I want to just mention is, one, in my life, I'll just speak from a personal standpoint. In my life, one of the emotions that has been really more painful than resistance has been regret.
Mm.
When I've looked back and said, oh man, why didn't I do that? Why did I talk myself out of it? Why did I do that?
Why did you take yourself out of the game? Why didn't you feel good enough about yourself? Yeah. And that sadness. And, you know, I think there's a genuine regret and a genuine grieving we sometimes need to do. And if that goes on for too long, that can become another form of resistance. You know, it's another way of stopping ourselves, you know. So, you know,
if you don't see it as part of the growth process.
No. So it's such a tender area, you know, when are we kind of beating ourselves up versus being compassionate to ourselves? When are we being tough on ourselves as opposed to being holding ourselves to good account, if you like? You know, it's a tricky area, you know, because most of us are pretty good at beating ourselves up, and resistance can be another battleground for self-flagellation if we're not careful.
So what is the next part of your formula here?
So the third part is, I call it, we find what we were born to do in what I call our shadow life. So in a way, we're kind of almost, we've got a life that's kind of parallel to it already, but we don't quite realize that. And what I mean by that is, I don't know about you, and I'd be interested to hear, you know, everybody on this call when we open it up in a minute, you know, how many of us were told from a child that there is something we were born to do, that we do have a vocation, we do have a calling, we do have unique spiritual gifts that will give us joy to share them, that we, you know, we're here as an agent of the divine, if you like. You know, how many of us were ever told that? So few of us. And if that is always true and always was true, if that isn't honored and validated from the beginning, where does it go? And I don't think it goes away. I think it goes into our shadow, if you like. It goes into a part of us that we don't consciously connect with because it's not been validated, it's not been blessed, it's not been honored. So what happens is, I think on an unconscious level, we kind of get drawn to the things that are close to our calling. So what I mean by that is, you know, when I was in the world of selling computers, I heard of something in London called Turning Points, which I went along to, and it was a mind, body, spirit lecture series that happened in Piccadilly that was just about to become something called Alternatives. And I loved it, and it was a kind of home for my soul. And I became an audience member, and then I ended up becoming a volunteer, then I joined the management team, and then I ended up co-leading it for several years. So basically, you know, I ended up approaching, hosting, and marketing people like Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, Susan Jeffers, Robert Holden, Marianne Williamson, Eckhart Tolle, Julia Cameron. You know, those people were mine to invite onto the Alternatives platform, if you like. And for a few years, it felt like I was living the dream. I'm getting to meet all these incredible leaders in their field, and I'm learning from them, and I'm meeting them. And there came a point where I started thinking, I've heard this before, you know. You know, it's wonderful, but I'm still not happy. You know, there's something wrong with me that I'm still not happy, even though I'm in the field I want to be in. And then I took Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, on holiday, I think about 24 years ago. I went on holiday with Helen just after we got together. And I read it's only a couple of paragraphs in her book, and she talked about the shadow artist. And she said the shadow artist is somebody who's drawn to their calling, the area of their calling, but they're kind of hiding out within it because they don't have enough self-belief to believe they have their own gifts and talents in that area. And as I read that, I had what I affectionately call, cover your ears if you don't like a rude word, I had what I call an oh shit moment, where I went, oh shit, I can see what I'm doing. I'm in the area of personal and spiritual development, but I'm hiding out in it. I don't, you know, if I was honest, I thought to myself, I don't want to be the one promoting the speakers anymore. I really feel a call to be a speaker. I don't really want to be the one promoting the authors anymore. I feel a real calling to become an author. And that's what I mean by shadow life. I was drawn to my area of calling, but I was hiding out within that area. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. You were on the fringe.
Yeah. So I'm in it, but hiding out within it. And sometimes, you know, I think there was a point where that was very healthy. It was like, you know, that was my spiritual apprenticeship, if you like. I learned so many great things from so many great people. But I realized my job was not to be a promoter of other messengers. My job, my calling was to be a messenger. So it was time for me to figure out what I had to say. But again, then my resistance kicked in because it's like, well, you know, Wayne Dyer says it's so much better than me. Susan Jeffers is so much more eloquent. What the heck have I got to say that hasn't already been said? So for many of us, if we recognize we have a shadow life and then we want to be more of the true calling, then our resistance is going to kick in yet again to say, you know, but but in a funny way, that's why we're living the shadow life, because we don't have the level of self-belief to do it ourselves. We play second. I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but we support other people's talent rather than believing we have our own talent. We support their voice rather than finding our own voice. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think there's certain situations where, for example, in the arts, I've got some clients who are directors, they're producers, and that is their calling. So they might be supporting the actors or the writers, but they are so secure and happy in that role. So it's just really resonating. You know, there's just a resonance to it, isn't it? There's just a resonance.
And I'm just thrilled, you know, because that idea was so powerful for me. So taking it back to why it's a pointer, you know, so the pointer is look at your life and say, what have you naturally been drawn to that you may be telling yourself, you know, your job is always to be a supporter. It's not to be the star in your own life. Where are you kind of envious of other people to some extent? Because sometimes I think, you know, our shadow life shows up as envy and jealousy of what other people are up to. And we're kind of going, well, I could do a better job than that. And the reality is maybe we could, but we're not. So it's to be honest and say, where am I hiding out? You know, the honest question is, where am I hiding out? But often we could be hiding out in a very public way. You know, I was hiding out in front of 500 to 700 people every week.
Yeah.
You know, that's how big our audiences were quite often. So it wasn't obvious that I was hiding out. It wasn't even obvious to me for a while that I was hiding out. But I was living a shadow life, going, aren't you wonderful? Rather than kind of going, aren't I wonderful? And I don't mean that in an ego trip way. I think there's a grandeur in each of us, which, you know, you and I talk about from a Course in Miracles perspective. There's a grandeur that came with each of our creation. Our job is to enjoy each other's grandeur, but our job is also to find our own grandeur and show up with that. So that's what I mean.
Right before you talk about courage, one of the things that I just want to reiterate as well is, when we are not doing that which really lights us up, that which we're inspired to do, that we really resonate with, we're not only doing ourselves a disservice, we're doing a disservice to the world.
Yeah. Well, I like to think of it as you said earlier, in a way, if we are all, you know, part of an orchestra, and we're not playing our bit of the tune, creation has been robbed. We've robbed ourselves, and we've robbed everybody else of our unique gifts. And again, that can hit many of us as being grandiose or arrogant. It's like, who the heck do I think I am? what if that is actually the spiritual truth, that you have gifts that are a blessing to other people? You know, and I don't mean this to guilt trip anybody, but what if you're actually being selfish by holding them back? You know, we think it's selfish to draw attention to ourselves, or to think we have gifts and we're supposed to think of ourselves as, you know, horrible, sinful people or whatever it is. What if that's all just grandiosity? What if the truth is we're here to shine our light and share our gifts? That's why we're here, and everything else is nonsense.
And this part of courage that you're going to talk about next, the other thing I just want to make sure we touch on, because I have gotten this before, it doesn't make any difference how old you are.
No.
It doesn't make any difference if you're super young and you're at the other age. These opportunities occur throughout your life.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, for me, there's been so many chapters of what I was born to do. And, you know, that's you know, it's gratifying when I've worked with people, as I'm sure, you know, many people on the call will have done, and worked with people, you know, over a period of years or even decades. And we've kind of all grown together. And as I've grown, I've seen the people that I support grow. And like, we're all blossoming into new chapters of what we're born to do. And I think, you know, obviously there's enthusiasm that comes with youth, and then there's maturity that comes with having been around the block a few more times. So they're all valuable, you know, both the enthusiasm of youth and the wisdom that comes with messing up more times, falling over and scraping our knees a lot.
So how do we have the courage to get up after we have a few scraped knees, Nick? How do we follow through then on that inspiration?
I'm hesitating because I'm looking for my most honest answer. I suppose, you know, what comes to me is, well, what's the choice? You know, when we hide out, we're miserable generally. When we're playing smaller than we truly are, we are not happy. As you said, we're not always nice to be around. I know when I'm not in my flow, when I'm having a bad time, I just want to put a fence around me that says keep out. You know, I'm not in a good space. And yet when I'm in my flow and when I'm doing well, I'm a blessing to other people. So, you know, in a way, choose to be a blessing. Choose to be a blessing and choose to give your gifts. You know, that what just comes to mind as well is, you know, I probably shared this with you, but about 8 years ago, I was ill with, I had a long story, but I went, gave a keynote in the Sudan, keynote talk, and I came back with hepatitis, and I was really ill for a few months. And I really lost track of myself in that time. You know, I just went into a black hole of both illness and depression. And I just had this intuition, you know, inspiration said to me, reach out to a few people and ask them the question to remind you what you're like at your best. So I reached out to a few people just to say, look, I'm in a really dark place at the moment. I can't remember what me at my best looks like. Can you remind me? And to me, it was one of the most courageous things I ever did. So much good came out of me asking that. But it took so much courage to reach out and say, can you remind me of what me at my best looks like? Because I ain't there at the moment. So it's having that courage to ask other people to help you remember you as well. You know, I don't know that we can always do it on our own. I think sometimes we really do need friends and community or coaches or just people that love us who go, I know you can't see it at the moment, but can I remind you of how amazing you are and what you do so brilliantly and the contribution you make to other people's lives. And I just hope that you get to remember that for yourself. And you get to see that again for yourself.
And what
I did.
What a gift that is for the person you asked.
Yeah. You know, and I've been, you know, blessed to be able to do that for other people as well. And I see part of my role as a coach and a mentor is not to flatter people, but to honor people. You know, we just touched on it. It would be a whole other conversation to have. But I think, you know, so many of us suffer from shame. You know, that one of the reasons we don't show up and one of our biggest forms of resistance is shame. And I think I'd fallen into kind of a hole of shame 8 years ago, into a hole of shame. The antidote to shame, I think, is honoring. You know, so I aim to honor where I can people that I treasure and value, which is not to flatter them, but to say, this is the good I see in you. These are the gifts I see in you. This is the leadership I see in you. And I'm just amazed at how many people are starving to feel honored.
Yeah.
So find people that honor you, honor yourself, and even, you know, like I did, ask for honor. You know, it's such a strange concept, and yet on one level, such a natural thing to do. Remind me of how good I am. I've lost track of it.
I love that. I love that. And it is I think it's one of the greatest honors of being a coach, as you said, and a mentor, because we don't typically coach our friends, our family. So we have another opinion, and to be able to tell someone, I see your glory, I see it, and to help them see it is absolutely just a wonderful way to help them see the inspiration that they're giving out in the world.
Thank you. And in a funny kind of way, you know, this has happened to me over the last few months because I've been going through a lot of grief around my mum passing and all sorts. I think sometimes even to say to somebody, I see how much pain you're in. I see how much suffering you're going through at the moment, and that's okay. I think even to honor and validate people's pain and people's suffering, you know, when somebody says to me, it's okay to be in that much pain. That's how much you loved your mum. Yeah. That moves me. And I think we kind of easily lose touch of the whole honoring thing, you know, honoring each other's gifts, but also honoring each other's suffering and grief and pain, because I think we often then suffer in silence. You know, we feel shame around that, which then becomes a double bind and keeps us small and stuff.
So to honor that human part of us as well.
Yeah.
So what else before we take questions?
I was going to say, let's open
anything else? You ready to do that now? Anything else you want to talk about? How to honor inspiration?
Everything else I want to talk about. I've learned a discipline over the years is knowing when to shut up sometimes.
Do we?
So yes, I could talk for another 3 hours, but I'm going to shut up because I think it's time to.
And we would love to hear you, actually. Do you want to put anything in the chat? Let's go ahead and let us have your questions. I might be savvy enough to see your little hands. I'm not sure if I would be or not, but I could sure try. I can sure try. And if you don't know, the chat should be open. Somebody go ahead. Kyle, I know you're still on here. Somebody just send me a little note in the chat, or send us a note so we know that that works. I think, there we go. Thank you, Christina and Kyle. Yes, great. All right, what questions?
Your son's being a good son and telling you that.
Look, everybody's very happy. What questions do you have?
Who's the author of that inspiration quote? Somebody called Patanjali. If I can, in the next minute or two, while the next question comes up, I'll find the quote and I'll actually post it for you, because I just love it. You know,
I love that. Someone who talks a lot about Patanjali was Wayne Dyer.
Yeah, I think I probably heard it from him in the first place. Yeah.
Yep, in a lot of his inspiration work. That's great. What other questions might you all have about what you're doing? So here's one from Debs. So she's saying that she's still looking for her passion. I get caught up for a while in something, but the passion fades. So there's a question. Deb's one is saying that she gets caught up with her passion, but that seems to fade. What would you say to that, Nick?
A couple of headline points. One, you know, some of us are what I would call Renaissance souls or portfolio workers, and what I mean by that there isn't necessarily one major thing that we keep doing. So it could be that it's natural for you to try doing different things. The other way of looking at it is that I think what often happens is we get caught in resistance. And we get so far, and then the resistance kicks in, and we go, well, that obviously wasn't the right thing for me to do. So it could be resistance, you know, without knowing precisely what happens. And there are times when things do fade. You know, I remember Seth Godin, some of you probably know, wrote a book a few years ago called The Dip. And the dip is, you know, something that we all go through, I think, which is about, you know, there are times when we can fall out of love with what we're doing. And the question is, does that mean it's time to walk away from it, or do we just endure the dip and then we're going to come back up the other side? There are certainly times I've fallen out of love with what I'm doing, or I found it too difficult, or it's not yielded the results that I wanted it to do. But for me, I've kind of then stepped back and go, but what the hell else am I going to do? Or what the heaven else am I going to do? So my answer is usually I need to either kind of recommit to what I'm doing, and often I need to get more intelligent in the way that I'm doing it.
I like that. And Debs, thank you so much for your question. There is something about knowing when things you need to pivot. There was a gentleman just a few years ago in our community that wanted to start he wanted to sell cassette tapes. Yeah, that's somebody that might still want to be in entertainment, still be able to help people, but look at that a little differently. So thank you, Nick, for putting that in there. Kyle has a question. What question can we ask ourselves daily to focus on our inspiration, to keep us focused on it? Good one, Kyle.
Great. Great question. I think it's great to have a kind of some kind of inspiring community that you belong to, even if that's just a couple of friends. You know, I would suggest even turning it into a project. You know, like every day, find something that inspires you, whether that's a new song, a new film, a new quote, a new piece of creativity, a new piece of expression. So, you know, I call it becoming an inspiration detective. You know, go seek out inspiration. Some of it will land in your lap, others of it needs to be sought out. But make it a project. Go out and find it and treasure it. And there are some things I think that inspire us at certain points in our lives, and some things that then kind of fade away and don't inspire us. You know, there are books I've read, you know, 20 years down the line. I think, what did I ever find in that book that was inspiring? I can't bear it now. It's a terrible book. But at the time, it was inspiring. And there are books and, you know, music or films that I never tire of being inspired by. They just keep touching me in some way and keep uplifting me in some way. So I think it's about getting to know yourself and what inspires you, and immersing yourself in what inspires you. So it's about self-immersion in the things that inspire you and continually seeking new wells of inspiration.
So I love that. And may I add one more thing?
Yeah.
One of the things that you taught me, Nick, and my clients that are on here are going to know what I'm going to say, is I journal daily. And if you guys are my clients, this is the guy that made me do it, because I tell you about the coach that made me do it and how much I love it. One of the things that if I am in one of those dark places, if I am in one of those periods where I don't feel inspired, one of the things that I will journal about is show me my inspiration today. Let me see it clearly. I tap into that inner well, and it always comes through. So that might be another idea as well.
Yeah, and I love that. Can I just say something? But you know, the image just came to me as you were speaking about, you know, sometimes the well of inspiration does seem to run dry, but maybe you just need to drill a bit deeper. And then there's another well, you know, there's another pool, another spring of inspiration waiting to come up. That's my experience, you know, because I think I never had a test, but I think, you know, towards the end of March, I think I had COVID. You know, I was extremely ill. I had all the symptoms. I never felt less inspired than I did during that period, but slowly the inspiration started to come back again. And now I'm back out writing every day. I never stopped journaling. Exactly, you know, just as you were saying, I don't know how many years I've been doing it. 13 years, maybe 15 years, maybe longer, I don't know. But I have journaled every day, first thing every morning, every single day. And I would much rather go out of the house without having had a shower or breakfast than go out of the house without having journaled. You know, it's an essential for me.
So that is one of the ways to prime that well of inspiration. It certainly is for me.
Thank you.
Now,
yeah.
Anastasia has a question, and I love this question. Would you consider that some of the building blocks to step into your passion aren't always fun?
Sure.
Example, in school, I completed incredibly in sports, loved it, but I didn't like pumping iron. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point, you know, and so I think there's two things, you know. I think sometimes we have to motivate ourselves to do stuff that serves a greater purpose, if you like, or serves a longer term goal. So yeah, I've recently been coaching somebody who was an Olympic athlete. He won a bronze medal at the Olympics about 12 years ago. And the more he tells me about, his life as an athlete, he's now in business and leadership, the more I kind of go, I just, every time I speak to him, I have more and more admiration for the level of discipline that he had to do things that he didn't particularly want to do, to become one of the best in the world at what he did. But for me, there's a difference, and the quote I often share is, I heard this quote from Luciano. Apparently somebody years ago asked Luciano Pavarotti how he got to be one of the best opera singers in the world, because apparently he still, practiced and rehearsed 6 hours a day. And somebody said to him, how are you so disciplined to do that? His answer was so revealing to me. He said, it's not discipline, it's devotion. There's a big difference. So I think when we find what we truly love, we choose to devote ourselves to it, there are times when it doesn't feel so much fun, but we know we're still serving a greater purpose or a longer term goal. Pretty much most days I still feel like writing. There are some days when I'm ill that I don't feel like writing or whatever, but it doesn't feel like, oh my God, I've got to write again. It's like, I get to write again. So there's something for me about the difference between discipline, which is often about making ourselves do something, versus devotion, which is about giving ourselves to something completely. So I don't know if that answers your question, Anastasia, is yes, we don't always feel like doing what we need to do, but hopefully it leads to more of the stuff that we do love to do.
And do you find that, at least I have found, what's inspiring me pulls me along?
Yeah.
I was inspired to do an online class for my Beloved Principles. I was very inspired to do that. It just was almost a download. It came exactly what to do. But the technical elements was like Anastasia pumping iron. That was not so fun.
No.
But keeping my eyes on what was inspiring me actually did help pull me through those technical parts. So I hope that helped you, Anastasia. Thank you again for your question. And here's a good one from, and the type is really small. I think is it Dorit?
Which one? Daughter, is it?
There we go.
Daughter. Yeah, hi, daughter. Yeah, so as I said, my tip about how to support people that are out of work back into work is, maybe you're right. There's two different dimensions. One is what's going to keep me going, what's going to keep me surviving. So I think, I'm a great believer in, do whatever you need to do to support your dreams. So yes, but I think what happens is that a lot of people go, well, I'll just carry on doing what I need to earn money. And then when I've got enough money in the bank, then I'll turn my attention to what it is that I really want to be doing. And I think, your purpose, your calling needs to have some of your love and time and attention on a very regular basis, even if it's only 20 minutes a day or half an hour a day. I say to somebody, well, often people say to me, I'd love to write a book, but I'm never going to have a free 6 months to write a book. I don't know anybody that has a free 6 months to write a book. I write a book an hour a day, 500 words a day. Over a year, that becomes a book, or over 6 months, that becomes a book. It's the small, consistent showing up, the difference between showing off and showing up. The regular showing up to both either discover or invest in what you love is what makes the difference. Who I am today has come from my daily investments over the last 3 decades. It's not an overnight thing. And I think when we devote ourselves to something day in, day out, it often feels like nothing's happening on a day-to-day basis. But only when we review do we go, blimey, we've come a long way. And I think that's really important. So it's the continual investment. Should we do the one from Kathy?
Yes,
coaching session. Yeah, hi, Kathy.
Kathy's telling
challenged you to ask whose prayer are you the answer to. I'm working on that person now, but I've recently become his coach, but feel after this webinar I'm hiding within the role somewhere. Yeah, I don't mean by being the answer to somebody's prayer we have to be their savior. It's just like we contribute to the good of their life, if only in a relatively small way. But yes, Kathy, you're already the answer to this guy's prayers. And there's probably a lot more people that you can be the answer to their prayers. You know, I know there are people that have saved me from self-destruction at times in my life, you know, and I'm so grateful to them. And I know that I've done that for other people. All of us are probably doing that for each other now. We just may not realize we're doing it. It's lovely when we get to hear it, but I also think we need to kind of act in faith. You know, I often think of, you know, I'm sure you think of this too, Diane. It's like, my job is to be a messenger. My job is to go spread the seed, to deliver the message. How it lands to some extent is not my business. It's lovely when I get to hear it, but if I'm only doing it to find out what a neat guy I've been, that's going to distort things. I was thrilled last week. I was almost moved to tears. You know, I had a knock at the door last week and I went to answer it. And do you know Fortnum and Mason's in Piccadilly in London?
Yes, actually, I have tea from there.
Oh, great. There was a hamper from Fortnum and Mason's. And I went, I didn't order anything. You know, I looked at the address to make sure it was right. But to cut a long story short, somebody I'd done some coaching with through a men's network that I'm involved with, you know, I'd had a few conversations with him and he said it'd been helpful. And he asked for my address a couple of months ago. He'd sent me a Fortnum and Mason's hamper, and part of me went, did it really have that much impact on you? I'm so grateful that I got to speak to him, and yet he was so grateful that I spoke to him, if that makes sense. So, you know, I was obviously the answer to his prayers at that particular point in his life, and I just was moved to tears. So, you know, sometimes it's just a small thing we do for each other that really makes the difference.
Yeah, you are looking at the next one, which,
Yeah.
and thank you all for, first of all, thank you all for being here, and thank you for these great questions. Kathy, that was great. And Sharon and Linda are actually, looks like they are shades of the same question. Sounds like sometimes you can feel like you're getting pushed into a specific direction. Not sure that's what you want to take, not sure that's the direction you want to take. What do you do with that? Or if you're not sure about your next calling. You know, Nick, you might have worked with folks like I have who were expected to be in the family business, and they had zippy interest in being in the family business or helping their spouse with whatever. My short answer to that is what you alluded to. What lights you up?
Yeah.
And if you're not being lit up, do you have practices that are grounding you in a way that you're open to receiving? Nick, what would you say to Sharon?
Sure. Yeah, you know, and I think I'd add another dimension to this, which is really, you know, it's kind of always been in my awareness, but I'm really, you know, I've had a few conversations over the last 6 months that have really brought this home to me. And the bottom line is how blind we are to our own gifts and how blind we are to our own power and strengths. They are almost, you know, for most of us, in our blind spots. So the dimension I would add is sometimes it's hard to do for ourselves. So, you know, I'm about to say something, and part of me is slightly hesitant to whether I should say it, but I'm going to say it. Anybody that's listening to this call, I will willingly have a 20-minute conversation with you for nothing. Because I know that if you get me on your team, you are not going to come away without clarity of something. You know, and I love doing that. So I mean that, you know, so Sharon, Linda, I'll happily have a 20-minute conversation with you. By the end of it, I think you'll have some clarity. Not that I'm particularly, I think I am gifted at doing that, but it's just, it is at times hard for any of us to do it on our own. And I don't know if you find that similarly, but I know that at the end of the day, most people hire me after having had a conversation. I only had people that I hire after I've had a conversation because I want to know how they're helping me see myself. You know, and I see myself, I see all of us really as being mirrors for each other. It's hard to see ourselves in our glory. We usually need somebody else to see it for us and point it out to us. So I hope that's not sounding negative because I'm sure you'd like to know how to do it on your own. You can do, and I think sometimes it is, I just want to acknowledge that sometimes it's hard to do on our own. You know, sometimes it's somebody saying almost a throwaway comment to me that makes me go, gosh, you know, how can I be so blind to that in myself?
I think that's a great idea. And
sense.
actually everybody is going to be getting not only the recording to this if you registered in advance, but you'll also get everybody's contact information. I mean, Nick and mine, as a matter of fact, not everybody who's on the call, just in case some of you guys got a little scared by that. So, oh, that was very generous. And I think that is wonderful. Nikki. Nikki loves what you were saying about honoring.
Yeah. Yeah, I was on a webinar myself recently through this men's network that I'm part of, and it was about shame. It was just a 2-hour event on shame. And at the end of it, the guy said, well, what's the antidote to shame? And he said, honoring. And I just thought, wow, that's so true, isn't it? How many of us really have felt honored in our life? You know, we've had maybe moments of it, but, you know, to me, great community is about consistent honoring of people's gold and gifts and grandeur. And sadly, so few of us get that. You know?
Yeah.
So
Or
thank
pay
you.
attention. When somebody is saying that to us, we go, oh
Yeah,
no,
we just kind of go, oh, it's no big deal. Yeah, yeah.
pay attention. So Amanda's
Thank you so
giving,
much. Now go away. You know?
yes. Amanda, what a lovely comment. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Anastasia. Now I'm making sure we're getting everybody's questions. Yes, I love It's a Wonderful Life as well.
Thank you.
Marion, yes, our work is love made visible. How do we get into this state of love, I think is what you're saying, Marion, and loving people while our world is falling apart. Nick, I know I have some ideas about
Yeah,
that.
why don't you go for that?
Okay, and then you follow it right up. To me, and I know we've all heard the phrase now more than ever, I just don't know when it was going to be more appropriate. For me, having a consistent daily practice that sets me up in the morning to react with love to whatever occurs has been absolutely, it's been life-changing for me. I teach my clients what I call the 3 M's: meditate, motivate, and move. To me, that's a way to start your day with mind, body, spirit, incorporating everything. When they have advanced past that, they get journaling, Nick. Journaling is right up in there. And one of the things that I'm always asking, as much as possible, because just like Nick, I have my days, I'm always asking of spirit, of the love, the wisdom that's within me, that's within all of you. Show me, what am I to do here? What I always write in my journal every morning, the last entry is always, love, what would you most have me know today?
Beautiful.
And I ask love to direct me.
Great.
What would you add to that, Nick?
I think what I'd add, a couple of things. Number one, we already are love, so we don't have to try and be love because we already are. Secondly, you know, both you and I love the Course in Miracles, as we've talked about. The Course in Miracles is very clear that your job is to remove the blocks to love.
Yeah.
So if we're not in touch with it, our job is to kind of heal and forgive so that more of the love that we are can surface and then we can share it. And thirdly, I just say, Marianne, that, you know, how do we get into this state of love and loving people while this world is falling apart? I feel like I'm playing slightly devil's advocate, but I do actually mean what I'm about to say, which is maybe the world is falling apart in order that we know more love. That the fear actually is kind of coming up to be, you know, washed away. Maybe it is what's going on is an invitation to more love. I think it is, you know. I think everything is an invitation to more love. What other purpose could there really be?
I agree. And again,
I don't mean that glibly, but I do mean it honestly. And I love what you were saying, Anastasia, about, yeah, it's a wonderful life. Yeah, most of us have no idea of how many people are grateful to us and how many lives that we've touched. You know, it's like a wonderful life. I love the quote from Amanda from Howard Thurman about what brings you alive. Yeah,
yes.
you know, I love that idea that, you know, it's about what brings us alive, because what brings us alive is a blessing to other people. You know. Okay, I don't know if I'm missing any more messages.
I think we've got most of them. Lots of appreciation. We appreciate each one of you. And I don't know about you all, but I really enjoyed this time. Thank you so much, Nick. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. We will be sending out information, but just right here at the end, is there anything else you want to tell everyone, particularly your website?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, you know, I wasn't joking. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody for a while. I feel that's my purpose now, is like, you know, just talk to as many people as possible. So you can contact me through my website, iamnickwilliams.com, iamnickwilliams.com. You can email me through nick@iamnickwilliams.com. I have been doing daily videos on LinkedIn and Facebook. I haven't done them for a couple of months because of what's been going on for me, but I will be resuming. So join with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the place I'm going to be most active on in the future. So I'd love to connect with you there. And my final message probably would be about, you know, don't rob the world of your gifts. You know, the world needs the gifts that everybody on this call and everybody on the planet has now. You know, I like to think of the work we're born to do as like unwrapping ourselves. We are a treasure trove that largely remains unwrapped. And our job is to unwrap who we are and what we have and share it as widely and as deeply as possible, and having as much fun with that as possible. It doesn't have to be heavy. It doesn't have to be sacrificed. I think it's a joy. You know, it can be a joy.
It can be a joy, and thank you for that. You all can see me at dianehaworth.com, and also my inspiration project is called beloveprinciples.org. We'll be sending this information out to you. I know somebody asked, can we share this recording? Absolutely, you can, as far as I'm concerned. And I will be putting it up on YouTube. I'll be sending you all links so you know exactly where it is. I do also want to not only thank Nick for sharing your brilliance and all the years of experience you have and everything that you've shared with us today, Nick. Thank you so much. But I want to remind each one of you the same wisdom, insight, joy, freedom, love, happiness that you ever see in anybody else is also present in you. And your opportunity is just to find a way to let your light shine a little more. And I hope we were able to help you do that today. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Diane, you know, because you led the way with this, you know, and I love doing these, but if I'm honest, I probably wouldn't have done it myself. So I'm incredibly grateful for you leading the way. So bless you, and thank you for our ongoing friendship and relationship, and thank you for all that you do to help bring, you know, your love and gifts into the world, and help kind of multiply that and amplify that through getting everyone else to see how precious they are and show up. So thank you so much for who you are and what you do.
Thank you. And thank
you to Robert for bringing us together.
Yes, thank you to our mentor, Robert Holden, who usually always comes up in our conversations. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your lovely comments. We are going to end this now, but you'll be getting an email from me soon. And I just want to thank you again. Make this a wonderful day and find something to be inspired by. I'm going to hold you all close to my heart. Bye.